The world works in interesting cycles. Fashion of 30 years ago will come back around to the modern day to be popular. The world will engage in another war over resources time and time again. And the gaming industry is no exception in this cycle, despite its forward progress and evolution of gameplay and graphics. Usually in that case, however, it's a remake or a remaster that takes the spotlight. But in this case, a small indie studio will take inspiration from the past and strictly hold on to those retro feelings of those experiences that shaped fellow gamers as they were children. Today's prime example of that is Ground Zero by Malformation Games, which released on April 16th, 2026 for the price of $19.99. It's currently available on the PC, specifically Steam, and it's a survival horror game that specifically targets the earlier days of survival horror, in particular during its rise on the PlayStation 1, with such games as Resident Evil 2 and Dino Crisis. And yes, you're looking at the timestamp and going, this is a long-ass review. If you're wanting a simple buy or no buy for me, yes, buy the damn game. It's fantastic. But I really want to go into detail about how I came to my actual score at the end of the review, because this game does a lot of things right, and some things wrong, but it overcomes those wrongs thanks to the whole package and the design. Anyway, with that intro out of the way, Ground Zero has you take control of Soo Young, a Korean operative that is being flown in on a special mission to Busan, as a large meteor has hit the town, and it's not exactly going well there. Before you ask, no, this is not related to Train of Busan, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go and watch it after this video, because you're missing out on some good zombie movie there. Now, in coordination with Canada of all countries, you have support in Evan, who will not be taking any sort of criticism in this review because he is the perfect helper companion. More on that later. Obviously, the meteor has left some life forms that can resurrect the creatures it comes into contact with even though they are dead. AKA, yes, this is another zombie game. It's up for Soo Young, however, to eliminate the root cause of the infection, while finding out more about the global stakes in the background of what seems to be a push and pull of political power. Yes, I know what you're thinking, and yes, you are correct in your assumptions on the direct influence on this game. It's a nice little village. Let's begin by starting at the obvious place here, the gameplay. If you're looking at the screen going, this seems like an alternate universe of Resident Evil 2, then you wouldn't be that far off, because it's clear that was the main inspiration for Ground Zero. The game most definitely plays into that, allowing for a choice of modern controls or traditional tank controls. I played with the modern ones, by the way, for the sake of this review, but there are a lot of choices that you can make to get that retro experience, including some filters and, well, just, you'll see in a bit. The structure of the game is simple. You get into an area, you'll need to do some tasks to progress closer to eliminating the infection at its core, whether it be finding a critical element for your scanner to unlock an area, or to literally destroy something blocking your path with a tactical C4. Of course, there's gonna be infected all over the place, ranging from your typical zombie archetype, zombie dogs, and even a surprise or two that you shouldn't think too much about when they come out. Like Resident Evil 2 in a certain way, you do have branching paths. Yes, I know in Resident Evil 2 it was Leon A, Claire B, Claire A, Leon B, but here you have a choice of paths at certain chapter marks, where you can go, let's say, into a hospital in one path and a police station in another. You of course start with a firearm, a magnum of all things, and a knife, but the magnum's really a pistol, and you have a laser to guide your shot. The laser and the control is in that perfect spot for me. It gives you enough movement to be able to precisely hit a specific spot that you want without it being too easy, as it has some sway that it throws in there that can make it just out of control enough where you do need to time your shots, especially at longer distances, or you'll end up wasting ammo. Headshots, of course, are worth a little bit more, like any other zombie game, well, most of them, and bullets are not exactly plentiful. Mostly. Each gun, of course, has its own strengths and weaknesses, and you'll need to rely on all of them to get through the game. However, let's just rip this band-aid off. There was a mechanic I missed when I was playing the game the first time around. Yes, I know I do a lot of reviews, and I shouldn't have missed it. I did. It's a mechanic that, well, maybe not unique to Ground Zero, is something I guess I wasn't expecting, and that's the critical hit system. Hell, around 2/3 of the way through the game, when the game was showing me locks and mentioning this system, I thought it was just random chance. No, it's not. See, the system works like this. Your character plants their feet and takes a breath, and you stand and aim. A bar comes up on the screen, and if you hit the shot while in this green section there, you get a critical hit, doing massive damage. That means that single bullets, when used right, can kill an enemy in one go. But there's an obvious downside. You're standing still during this. Enemies have some speed in this game, so they can get to you quicker than you may think at times. So it's a trade-off, especially if there's multiple enemies around, because focusing on one means the others are gaining ground on you. Now obviously, with me not having used it for a majority of the game, that means my ammo was always feeling reasonably low, that I was stressing about it, especially in the first half of the game. Regular enemies could take 3 to 4 regular bullets or a shotgun shot, and that started to add up with me wanting to kill everything known to man. There were times that I pulled my knife out and played chicken with lower level zombies to save ammo. And so, if I knew about the critical hit system, I might have experienced things a lot differently than most players would. However, and one of the game's biggest strengths is that, surprisingly, both ways work. The stress of the ammo in the case of my first run did really enhance the tension and was more familiar to me, which is part of the appeal of a survival horror game. And yet, when playing through on the second go, I didn't play all the way through, but a little bit, the critical hit system had its own tension with the speed element, because your character, when moving, is fast enough where they can normally run by a lot of things in the game without engaging. And if you know where to go and don't get caught in a corner, that's sometimes the best option. So it's sort of a trade-off. Do you want to be stressing about ammo, or do you want the mobility? I think both work when trying the critical hit system in the second playthrough, and it's nice to have those options, and the balance seems to be there. One of the things that I want to stress about Ground Zero is that in a vacuum, there are decisions that are made that many would say are negatives from a gameplay standpoint. Now granted, taste is always in the eye of the beholder. Some will like traditional survival horror elements, some will like more past decisions. But there are traditionally elements that are considered good game design that at times Ground Zero most definitely breaks, especially when mirroring old games from the PlayStation 1. Sometimes those decisions back then were made due to memory restrictions or being creative with what memory you had, which obviously aren't as vast anymore. And yet, they still work here in a really weird cyclic kind of way. Let me give an example. Those who played games like Silent Hill will note that back in the PS1 era, there were times where the games took very unique and weird-ass camera angles with the static shots of the environments that the players were in. Whether it be completely from the top down to being on a weird angle, you could get situations that you may not be able to see everything that's going on, or you have a weird sense of direction. And from what I remember, there were times that, yeah, you could easily get snuck up on and attacked just because of the way that it presented. Traditional game design would probably try to avoid that, as the catalyst for the player to react wouldn't necessarily be something they could anticipate, even though they could be cautious because they may not be able to see everything. You don't want players being too cautious because you want them to make progress in a reasonable way, but back then there were situations where the game felt maybe a tiny bit unfair because, well, you just didn't know and you had to learn via doing. Ground Zero has situations similar to this in terms of concept. Now, there are camera angles that are a little bit weird and strange that brings that nostalgia back, but in terms of design, there are times where there are creatures off screen that can attack you. In particular, there are acid-spitting zombies that can hit you from a range off screen. Which, yeah, traditionally, at least in traditional game design, that would feel really unfair. The fact is, you may not have a time to react to it. And yet, in this scenario, you do have something that actually will give you the indicator, the directional sound. It gives you enough of a hint that even though you may not be able to exactly know where they are, it gives you enough to maybe run in a particular direction to avoid the hit. And that means a lot when it comes to fair and playability. See, I love that the game does things that makes me feel uncomfortable as a player without it feeling unfair. The environments, for example, can be really all over the place when it comes to combat, and it's something that I feel like modern game design seems to avoid. Uncomfortable fighting conditions, in particular in the environment. Sometimes here it's a long hallway, sometimes it's a cramped alleyway, sometimes it's spots where getting an angle with your laser can be difficult. It's all these things that end up making it so that each situation feels a little bit different and you have to adjust on the fly, which really means a lot for a game that is survival horror. You also need to remember the genre here, horror. More than any other genre, horror is the one that can get away with breaking more traditional game design elements because of the use of tension and the unexpected, while still staying within a reasonable frustration factor for the game. In essence, by showing that it's willing to break established elements, it puts you on edge for what could be broken. But it also influences more decisions on how to play it because of that. Look, that may not have made a lot of sense to you, so let me explain with an example. Let's take an example of a common criticism in game design that applies to more than this genre, but typically is one you want to avoid in a variety of genres. Backtracking. Forcing a player to go back the way they came, especially over and over again, for reasons that may be unclear, can be considered a negative for a game experience. You see this criticism vary when it comes to the genre, however. For example, for Metroidvanias, I would say that criticism is medium to high frequency when it comes to the complaints I see. Sure, there will always be some backtracking with maps constructed to be accessible with different skill sets, for example. But some of the worst ones I've played forced me to go back to places unnecessarily because it was unclear with direction of where I needed to go, whether it be quest or direction, actually moving among the map, or I needed a specific item that was in a place that I had to get back to. The better Metroidvanias would give more direction or give me ways to expedite that process, or give me a good reason to go back. Story, or improving enemies, or new gameplay elements that made it a little bit different to actually traverse this location. For survival horror, this is a little more of a case-by-case basis, because I want to apply it here to one section in particular to Ground Zero to make my point. The police station. Because it's a police station, there is of course levels of access in your typical level 1, 2, and 3 keycards. These locations are scattered throughout the station, meaning you'll have to go back the way you came once you get a new card in order to get to new locations, to get you new equipment, or to get you to your objective. And this is where the design decisions start, because there are ways to handle that to enhance and dehance the experience. See, in the case of Ground Zero, ammo, like most survival horror games, is a limiting feature. You may not have the excess ammo you'd want to deal with problems. And so, going back the way you came, backtracking, can be interesting depending on how the designers choose to challenge you. Do they respawn enemies that you've killed? Do they do the whole Resident Evil remake and have them pop up again? Well, in Ground Zero's case, at least the difficulty I played at, it does not. And thus, every enemy I put down means I don't have to worry about it later on. But it's contrasted with the fact that I don't really have to. I'm agile. I can run faster than most enemies in this game, although not that much faster. Enough to get distance to make shots, but not enough where you can turn around that frequently. The thing is, you can technically run by a lot of the shit that happens in this game, more so than any other Resident Evil I've played. But the catch is the environments. In the police station, you can run into barricades and dead ends rather quickly. Hallways are not that wide, so you may be able to get by things running by them, but you could also be a little bit too close for comfort and end up catching yourself on something and maybe losing some ground running into something. Or even worse, turn down the wrong way into a dead end because you forgot the labyrinth-like layout, forcing you into a fight at that point. So let's think of the design again. If the enemies respawn, then running still makes a lot of sense in almost every situation. If they're going to respawn anyway, then you're running by the same things, and the idea of running by them is actually a lot more attractive. You're not wasting ammo, but you may run into a situation where you need to kill one, because, well, they're just in the way. Okay, fine. But let's consider if they don't. Maybe there's a particular zombie that's giving you problems because they're spaced in such a way that you don't think you can run by them easily, and attracting them may get more attention. So you put it down. Then you run by, and you come back, and you realize it's a lot easier because it's dead. So now you make a choice. Kill the things that you need to kill, and avoid the ones that you don't. Now, those who've played the game will point out a fatal flaw in my argument: the scanning mechanic. See, when you kill things in this game, you can scan them to gather genome points. The idea being scanning the creature will give the government more data to be able to understand what they're fighting. Those points can be traded for resources: health, ammo, new guns, etc. That part of the story sort of falls apart when you want to just give them everything. Never mind. So killing them does seem to be worthwhile, right? You get points, you get more ammo to use on them. Well, maybe if you kill them in the right way and don't waste ammo. Killing a zombie can be interesting in terms of those points. If you hit him with a headshot, you may get a lot of points compared to its base value. But hit him with a shotgun, it's not as much points. There's not as much material to use, I think is the justification. See how everything is sort of interconnected here? The points, the running, the ammo usage, the hallways, everything is coming together in one package. And you can pull on the strings of one, and it will affect the others in certain ways. But it stays together. Which leads me to the point that I really want to emphasize, and if you should take anything away from the gameplay section, which is not going to be done, it's going to go on for like 10 minutes or so, it's this. The game is balanced in such a way where all these mechanics come together in one package. Sure, you pull on one mechanic and it may affect others, but the game gives you enough flexibility while still feeling challenging in order for you to overcome things, which is nice to see. Some games, when you pull on one part, it breaks. It breaks literally. In terms of boss fights, I think the game takes a step back in terms of that, but that's not necessarily like a horrible step back. They're serviceable. I do appreciate that they approach things a little bit differently and with a little bit more logic at times with what's available. There are times in other survival horror games where it's just like, you do realize there's like a rocket launcher or a machine gun in the other room, and why don't you go get that? But this game, it seemed to flow a little bit better in terms of like, oh, hey, that makes a little bit more sense. Granted, the combat and the situations there, they aren't necessarily the most dynamic per se, but I don't think that they're anything that will make people go, yeah, I'm not playing the rest of this game. It's just that I wanted a tiny bit more from them. I haven't even gotten to the puzzle element of the game, which you can actually decide the difficulty of the combat and the puzzles in the game. Now, the puzzles are an interesting case. On one hand, you have, when you go to your sort of bank-like system, you'll always get the option to either break into it or do a math problem. I was a mathlete in school. This is a real thing. The math problems were easy, but it was at normal difficulty. When I did it on a higher difficulty, the math problems were a little bit harder, so that was nice to see. But let's talk about the real puzzles of the game. What I liked about the puzzles, and in particular the puzzles towards the mid and end game, is that the puzzles weren't necessarily one of those things where you had to have the right thing in order to understand it. It definitely helped, but you could use a little bit of logic in order to understand what the game was going for. I don't want to necessarily spoil puzzles in particular and solutions in terms of the gameplay, because I want you to experience what I experienced, just logically thinking about things. So let me give a sort of offshoot example. This is not in the game, but this is something that I find similar to what I experienced in the game. So let me parallel with an actual real example. Majora's Mask 64. So Majora's Mask, you had 3 days in which you could do things to avoid the moon crashing into the world. You would go back in time to where you needed to do the next quest. But those quests were sort of put out on all 3 days. Some of them started on day 1, some of them started a little bit later, and certain people were in certain locations. You could get hints about what would happen and what times they were there via some, discussion with people or just hints in the world. And that's what I'm paralleling to here. You have the ability to switch certain things at certain points in the game, but you don't know exactly what you need to do at first. But if you read a little bit of information that you are able to see, or just logically think about things, like, well, I know this person would probably want to be there because they want a certain thing at this time. Maybe I go there in terms of causing that event to happen, kind of thing. I like that kind of puzzle. I like the fact that I didn't have to read things and I just thought, I wonder if I do this to there, this will get me what I want. The puzzles are exactly what I would want for this game. They break up the action, they break up the gunplay, and make you think a little bit and make you explore a little bit without being too intrusive or too, annoying to solve. And they make you think a little bit, but enough where you're like, that was cool. I would like more of that, please. Now, I will say that I did not play the game at the higher, hardest difficulties in terms of the puzzles. So when you beat the game, you get more difficulties unlocked. Obviously, the gameplay, it makes a little bit more sense, but the puzzles, when I tried the puzzles on the hard portion, I only got to points where it was really affecting the sort of opening the boxes thing that I was mentioning, the math problems, which were more difficult, but they were they had a known solution. They weren't as open-ended as some of these other puzzles. I do wonder what those are later on in the game, but quite frankly, it's been like 5 weeks since I've done a review on this channel, and YouTube is already pissed off at me in terms of the algorithm. So, now, this game has multiple endings. There's the obvious ones where you have a choice towards the end where you make a decision that will either take you one way or the other. And I'm going to be honest with that choice. To me, it's one of those choices that don't make sense because there's one that's obviously the choice that they want you to make. But there are alternate endings. And I will say, those who like the Silent Hill series will appreciate this game. Yes, I'm hinting at something. Yes, it's probably not what you're expecting from this game. And yet, I saw it, and it was fantastic. 10 out of 10. Would do again. Now, those who were expecting that to be the only content in the game in terms of the main campaign, you'd be wrong. This game has a mercenaries type mode. Now, granted, the structure here is a little different. You have to kill certain creatures in the levels, but it gives you a couple of characters to choose, and it gives you a time limit. You can get more time as you go along, and it does feel very mercenaries-like. Granted, I didn't spend as much time on this because it's unlocked after the game, and I wanted to play a little bit more of the main campaign, but I could see myself going back to this in terms of the fact that the combat is structurally sound all over the place. It isn't something that, let me put it this way, it's just a tier under Resident Evil 4's mercenary mode. I played the shit out of that when I was a kid, by the way. So, what's Ground Zero's greatest weakness? Well, surprisingly, it's the length, and not in the way that you would expect. Ground Zero for me took about 14 hours to complete on my first playthrough. I was playing around with things at all, looking at all the corners, but many of the modern day gaming universe would love that the game has so much content on its first playthrough, let alone the fact that you get, more difficulties, more things to unlock with subsequent playthroughs. And not to mention the branching paths, right? Well, the problem is that first playthrough, it's the pacing. Specifically when it gets to the 66% completed area of the game. Funny enough, the game is still doing things at that moment, like giving you a boat to use and explore with. Granted, the controls of this boat is like a redneck sundae with a 24-pack of Miller Lite, but hey, it's still fun in its own way. But it's just that at that point, it starts to drag a little bit. Enemies surprising you starts to not have as much of an impact. And frankly, things are starting to feel a little bit too familiar. I actually think that whole boat section, I do wonder if it was needed in the big picture. And even though I did praise the police station in terms of its balance and design, I will say that at a certain point, it did start getting a tiny bit annoying because it was just getting turned around and confused a lot to the point where I was just like, okay, I gotta stop and look at the map every 5 seconds. So, yes, it was balanced in a way, but my memory apparently shit. Also, the mercenaries mode, I understand it works for some people in terms of you gotta kill certain enemies in order to pass. I just wanted something like the mercenaries mode in RE4, killing a bunch of things and then getting 0 points because you didn't complete an objective that's still a little bit confusing. Yeah, I just wish it was a little bit more straightforward. And those points make a difference because they can be used to unlock things. Look, I've already spent like 26 minutes on the gameplay. This review is probably going to, if not hit an hour. I understand that. But I want to make it clear. If you want RE2 for the PS1 in a modern day form, or any survival horror from the PlayStation 1/2 era in a modern form, you should have bought Ground Zero a couple of weeks ago. And if you haven't, you should buy it now, because Jesus Christ, the thing that this game did was it transported me back to being a kid playing those games for the first time. Granted, I'm a lot smarter, I'm a lot more experienced, and I appreciated the design elements a lot more, and yet it brought the nostalgia. And my God, more than any other game lately, that really came through. The nostalgia. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the game's presentation. I know I've been making comparisons to the PlayStation 1 era of video games in the gameplay section, and when you first looked at the footage of Ground Zero, you might have gone, huh? I think that's a lot better than PS1, and yes it is, especially with the resolution. But the game actually mirrors presentations like Fear Effect 2 from that era. The face has surprising detail for the level of simplicity it uses, and I feel like the decisions made here were playing to the game's horror roots, specifically what they chose to animate at times and what they chose to not animate. Like having the characters blink like a normal human and then not move their mouths when talking, that feels deliberate. You could have easily coded up the movement of the mouth to any time they are making noise, and while it wouldn't be 100% accurate, it would get the job across. but not having them move their mouth feels more unnerving, unnatural in combination with the blinking. What's funny is that there's definitely attention paid here otherwise, like the movement of eyebrows to show emotion. It's just what's not here is also important to the presentation. That inconsistency goes beyond the characters too. I mean, take this opening cutscene here, and how detailed and effective that background lightning is. More of the lighting and the lightning. And how this wood on the crate feels rather realistic. And then take a look at our character here. Doesn't she feel a little out of place? Well, again, I think that's part of the point. This is present especially in the cutscenes. Things feel very unnatural, but when it gets into the gameplay, it disappears a little bit because, well, you're focused on that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this is nothing more than a theory in terms of how I took the game. I mean, there is a lot of good work in the texture and asset department. Whether it's air conditioning units on the side of a building, or even seeing the depth of paint on a painting on the wall, there is a lot of good here, and even the inconsistencies with some of the other elements, it's still lovely to look at and well put together, even if some of it came from an asset pack. Now let me be clear, I have no specific reason to believe asset packs were used, and quite frankly, they are fine to use in a situation like this, that you put it together with otherworld assets to make a great presentation. I only bring it up because there are times where the quality of certain assets in my mind don't hold up, and maybe not for the aforementioned reasons of the horror environment. Like, I understand that this cake is not the focus of this scene, and has probably been through the shit in the rain and everything going on, but man, just take a look at everything around it, and then take a look at that, because, yeah, something seems off there. And this level of asset happens every blue moon, and yet it keep on coming back to it at times, because it just feels like it wasn't supposed to be there for a non-gameplay reason. That to me really comes forward in the actual infection on the ground, because it always... I can't put my finger on it. It just doesn't feel right. Which maybe that's the point, unease. But something about the shade and the color at times doesn't fit to me with plant life, and in particular the world around it. And, well, yeah, I'm sort of making my own point here. I mean, it's literally not of this world. Maybe it sticks out so much because, well, it's everywhere. But I do want your opinion on this, because this is the one point that I really struggled with in this review. Something didn't feel right in terms of the actual presentation of the infection that you see here. So let me know what you think of it in the comments below if you've gotten this far in the review. Actually, side note here, can we talk a little bit about how Se-young is actually dressed here? I mean, I understand you're going for the South Korean military officer with a little bit of, you know, spy thrown into it. But how the fuck does she not get the most horrible wedgies from her outfit? Like, from a practical standpoint, it looks like anything that would get caught on her utility belt or midsection would cause the thing between her legs to pull up. She would be actually giving herself the ultimate wedgie at several points in this game, whether it be grabbing something from her belt or, you know, it just getting caught on something. Yes, I know it's nitpicking, and I understand that it was probably done because you're staring at the backside the entire game and you wanted a little bit of definition. I get it. But there are ways to do that without it looking like I literally have pains of sympathy for her. Anyway, moving on. What impressed me the second most about Ground Zero was its sound design. Look, I admit that when it comes to indie games, I expect good, but not great sound design, in particular with gameplay and how it affects it. Now, if you don't know, with other reviews that I do try to mute the sound when playing it for review to see how much of an effect it could have in terms of my experience. Yeah, it had a major effect here, because as mentioned in the gameplay section, there are hints of attacks that come off screen, meaning I can dodge it if I do things correctly, and directional sound seems to be pretty on point. Everything is clear where it needs to be, but some of like the static effects or some of the sound effects where you're like trying to get some hints on things, they do have an aura to them that makes you feel again a little bit uneasy, but like maybe like you're leaning in a little bit to see, okay, what's that? The sound of the shots in particular are crisp and echo through my headphones, especially the main Magnum, and it leaves an impact. The little twing from the shotgun and the cocking the gun afterward is nice, and the slice of a knife in a zombie is exactly what I'd want. The little confirmation sounds of opening up the save system is good and have a jingle-like quality. Listening to the pitter-patter on certain surfaces, in particular the metal stairs, really gets me in the moment. Now granted, part of that is that I worked on air conditioners and walked up metal stairs, so I am so understanding of that sound, but it is engulfing in terms of this sound design. And frankly, I'm trying to remember exactly what last game really got me into this sound. Anyway, take a listen to a variety of examples here, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Okay, I guess you don't want me to go down that way. Oh, it's... I feel like there's a shot in one of the original Resident Evils like that. As to the voice acting, it's good. Granted, I'm not expecting anything crazy out of a smaller production, but Sei Young does a good job of getting her character's personality across as a non-nonsense soldier, but then shows some good range of emotion as the plot unravels. The gruff nature of Evan, along with his more upbeat nature, really comes through in his voice lines. And when he does show emotion, there is that tension in his voice that really sells the moment. Evan really can do no wrong. Isabella to me is the weird one here. Like, she's got the whole mysterious agent with Spanish influences and a hint of sexual undertones going on, but it's so consistent in her character, especially who she's talking to, that it can feel one note at times. I don't want to say that this was the voice actress not being able to show range, not at all, but there's something missing compared to the other performances here that she does stand out a little bit. Not to say that it's bad, just that I wanted a little bit more out of her. Take a listen to some examples here, and you'll hear what I'm talking about overall.
Evan, are you there? I just killed a dog. Actually, 2 dogs.
Yeah, I'm here, Sal Young. I'm just in the middle of something right now. What? Wait a minute. Killed 2 dogs? Were they rabid? Did they attack you? What the fuck happened?
I don't think they were really dogs.
I'm not sure I understand. What are you talking about?
I mean, yes, they were dogs, but there was something really wrong with them. It was like a... 제가 도와드리러 왔습니다. 다치셨습니까?
Yeah, no, I don't think he's here to help.
저 종양은 저건... 물러서세요. 경고합니다. 제 말 들립니까? 저는 치명적인 무력을 사용할 권한이 있습니다. 사용하게 만들지 마세요. 저는 도우려는 겁니다. Hold it. Whatever's in that safe isn't yours to take.
Ah, but you think you can have it? Sorry, honey. This is mine.
You have bigger.
But more, hija. Too bad, honey. I guess this is the last time we'll meet. Should have kept your distance.
Let's take 5. Ride out the rest of the storm in here, okay?
Good idea. I'm sure it'll pass soon.
If it could just give me 5 minutes first. That'd be great. Oh! Jesus! Is something in here with us?
It's okay, Evan. It was just the wind blowing in.
You never know, Sion.
What else would it be? A ghost?
I don't know. After everything we've seen here, it wouldn't be that crazy.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a more...
You think there are ghosts in here? You're not serious, are you?
Hey, I never said I believe that.
I'm sorry. As to music, the game does a good job of complementing the story and the atmosphere with the music present, but I will admit it does take a huge backseat at times to the sound design to shine, which is fine. It sets mysterious and horror tones with wandering around, but gets your attention at the right times when the action music breaks through, knowing that something is going on. I also will say that the save room music in particular, it has the same effect as hearing the save room jingle / music in Resident Evil. It brings a calming presence, and I didn't expect that. I mean, yes, a lot of games like this have that same room music, but this one in particular set out. Just like the last one that I played on this channel. Yeah, I know that's a little bit weird saying that it stood out, but, you know, it did. Now, would I say it's the weakest part of the presentation? Yes, and that has to do with the fact that, one, it is complimentary, but two, a lot of the tones and the sort of like haunting strings / noises that are made here, they all start to bleed together over time. The fact is, there isn't any standout piece where I'm like, I would like to hear that in the background while I am coding horrors in AI at work. And by the way, I don't want to be doing that, but sadly I have to because that's part of my job. I hate this new future. Just take a listen and hear what I'm talking about here. Okay. You're giving me a lot of shit. Alrighty, what does this do? Oh, upload mission? Oh, hi. Look at that. Finally, let's wrap up this review talking about the story. Ground Zero is by no means anything special in the story department when it comes to survival horror. The core elements are here that you'd expect. Mysterious infection, government and company forces which seem to have more than one real goal when completing the task, etc. You're not going to get anything special out of this. However, that doesn't mean that it is bad. There's a little bit of intrigue at all levels, and quite frankly, I was entertained by it. The game feels like it plays into tropes, and no doubt. I mean, the existence of Isabella, the third party that you don't know if you can trust, but also seems to be helping you, but not really, is the Ada Wong of this campaign, despite not having sexual tension with our protagonist. The tropes here are familiar, but I will say that Ground Zero does enough to at least make it feel like it's a tiny bit different. When the game slows down for a second and lets Soo-young and Evan actually take a break, you do get some depth into their characters beyond the main mission. And that's rather important considering they are the stars of the show here. Evan is the everyman, who does have a great sense of humor, yet also rises to the occasion more than a comic relief. But there's an element of his emotions that reveals the real defender of the little guy that is at the core of his character. Granted, if you put a gun to my head and ask what is Evan's fault, I would say, well, nothing, and I don't necessarily like characters like that, but there's something about Evan that's just approachable in terms of a storytelling element where you can believe what's going on and how he would react to it. Soo-young is a more interesting story. The game obviously plays the military special forces aspect and loyalty for country and following orders, and how the events of the game should be pushing against that belief of hers. It is a very slow burn in that case, but it's also believable, especially when you understand more about South Korea and its military element. I do really love how it progresses here. It's not a flip of the switch, and there's definitely resistance that comes from her, but it's whittled down in the right ways. In those moments where logic does seem to go against the orders and her beliefs that she's been given, but it's not a direct rebellion right away. The reason why the game is so reliant on those three characters that I mentioned is that you literally don't come across any other named living human throughout the story. Sure, you get people mentioned in notes and phones you come across, but it was very surprising that the game doesn't have the moment of finding a human survivor present at first infection like you would in almost every other zombie story. And I will say that the story does suffer a little bit because of that. You don't get to see the devastation and in particular the paranoia play out directly. You get to see some of it in some of the files in terms of like people being like, I don't know if I can trust these people in terms of them screwing me over, but it could have been used as a good vector to push Soo-young's belief system in. In fact, the only other major character would be the town itself, which I think is very similar to the actual town of Busan. Like, you don't get a real overhead view of the in-game town, but looking at things like the Yeongdo Lighthouse and the in-game lighthouse, you will see similarities. But what I like about how the game went about placing assets to tell the story is that it uses intelligence and yet not intelligence when placing it. Like, of course, there's evidence of people guarding themselves from the infection, but sometimes it is just a little bit off. Like, why would you guard against an elevator door in this situation? The creatures don't have that kind of thinking. And yet, in a panic, that would make absolute sense. What's open, what's available, and what's not. It's cool to imagine what the story is behind the curtain here. And there's a very good canvas that the game paints itself on when it comes to the story. Your imagination can run wild. Side note though, every now and again, it does stretch that element in the environmental storytelling in combination with the gameplay. Now, I'm not talking about things like this helicopter, for example. Yes, it probably wouldn't just be sort of sitting there at the level of the police station, but I could see a scenario that it happens in. It just, everything has to go right. I'm talking more about things that don't make any sense even before everything happened here. This basement, and in particular, these hallways. These are part of the actual structure of the building? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see this happening. I mean, I know it's Korea, but, you know, OSHA would just have a field day with this. And it sort of took me out of the moment a few times when things like this happen. Look, the story here in general gives you enough meat on the bone to set up a world that you want to know more about, and a solid set of characters. But I will admit that I do wish there was just a bit more story content given the length of the game. In fact, and this is going to sound crazy coming from me, but cutting out a section of gameplay for about an hour and using that for more story would have given the game a lot better balance. at least in my opinion. Not to say that it was bad, far from it, but it could have been more optimized. In the end, a lot of people may find a lot to criticize with the Ground Zero experience on an individual level, like nitpicking a scene from a show out of context. You can always find something in the moment, but it's a matter of how it comes together as a package. And that's where Ground Zero shines. The gameplay is filled with tension while still feeling beatable, and the game will make you feel smart and stupid in the right ways. The story is solid while having some great characters to build off of, and there are little touches of sound and visual presentation that make a game that I wanted to see more of, despite the fact that it probably went a little long. It's a game that I could see myself replaying in a couple years, or replaying now and again, and for me, that's saying something. See, I have so many games in my backlog. I mean, I'm covering 2 to 3 new indie games a week, more like 1 to 2 lately, but, work. And I've got a backlog that's huge. I still haven't started Metaphor, and I got it for Christmas 2 years ago. The fact that I want to replay this game in the near future, that should tell you something. The fact is, for a $20 game, you're not going to get more bang for buck for this. And if you're a Resident Evil, survival horror, or hell, even a PS1, PS2 fan, you have to get this game. The game earns a 97 out of 100, making it a must-buy, even if you're hurting for cash. But of course, that doesn't take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see where the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Funny enough, I understand that there are certain people who are not going to enjoy this game. It's just not their bread and butter. They prefer a certain kind of survival horror or action horror, anything like that. But even those people, I would say, maybe give it a try, because there's enough flexibility here in terms of the systems and enough polish around the right points that you may find your favorite cult hit that no one has heard of. Well, I hope that's not the case. I really hope that this game takes off. I don't want to see it at the end of the year list. I really hope it's not on the end of the year overlooked games list. For the love of God, do not let this be on the overlooked games list, people. Anyway, that's it for this review. And yes, this took a while. I mean, just look at the length of this review. But in particular, there were a lot of times in this review process that I kept going back and finding more things while going through footage. I mean, I could probably talk about this game for another hour and a half, 2 hours in terms of a video edit, but I just don't have the time, people. Anyway, if you like this kind of content, hit that like button. And yes, reviews won't be this long all the time. It's just every now and again a game comes around that I really need to talk about. As to what's upcoming on the channel, I know I want to review Coffee Talk Tokyo. I mean, I haven't started it yet. I didn't get a review copy, but in my sort of future, I do want to get the overlooked games list of 2025 done for the Steam Summer Sale. I've got about 4 or 5 weeks to get it done. My list, I think, is sort of solid in terms of where I think the games are, but it's going to take a little bit of effort to get that video together, of course. And so, take a look at that. It may get pushed to the end of the year. Don't be surprised. Works. If you want more information about what I'm working on or what I'm looking at, you can follow me on Twitch as well as Discord in the description below. Anyway, that's it for now. And as always, keep on gaming.